Enjoyed that. All right, moving into the last session of the day, which is one that has been mentioned quite a few times, which is sustainability. We'll be talking about driving sustainability through a robust supply chain ecosystem. I would like to invite my panelists to the floor. We have Jeroen Hendricks, who's the Director of Art of Supply Chain. Welcome. Koo Hock On, who's the Director of Green Renewable Organic World, or GROW. Thank you. I hope our knowledge will grow with you, Mr. Koo. All right, Dr. Jenny Wong Suk Kwan, Dean of Saito University College. Thank you. And we also have Roger Chu, Global Sales Director of SFS Pharma Logistics. Welcome. Round of applause for my panelists. Great, thank you. Now, sustainability, it's a hot topic. It's a huge topic. And we're going to start this not with a question to my panel, but with a question to you. When we get a chance, if we can get the Menti poll up there, I do like to make these as interactive as possible. We've had a lot of conversations. Thanks. We've had a lot of conversations about sustainability, and I think within the context of global supply chains, we're starting to increasingly see this as a risk factor. In IDC's survey, we've seen a number of concerns expressed by both the transport and logistics businesses as well as retail and manufacturing organizations. Transport and logistics organizations tend to prioritize the energy aspect of sustainability, and we are seeing organizations, focus on energy as a way of A, saving costs, but B, also improving their carbon footprint. Another area where they're also focusing on is on natural resource crisis or shortages. Now, this is something that's come up as a result of, say, example, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and it is showing an emphasis. We're seeing this in the context of general risks. So obviously, economic issues are one area that organizations are focused on, but it's not the top area. We see energy, then economics, and then we see global and natural resource shortages. So the world's attention is definitely focused on sustainability as an area of risk, generally, not just supply chain risk, right? These concerns actually reflect the recognition that these are going to have an impact on organizations globally. We are seeing that organizations recognize the critical role of sustainability in mitigating risk, and ensuring the long-term viability of supply chains. We're seeing the need to address environmental and resource-related challenges to maintain not just sustainability resilience, but operational resilience. Now, we do have a poll up here. Again, I would like to invite you to go to menti.com, enter in the code 56435164. 56435164. And the question is, what do you think is the most significant barrier to achieving environmental sustainability in the Malaysian supply chain ecosystem? We have a number of responses here. The first is limited awareness of and understanding of supply chain practices, high implementation costs, lack of government support and incentives, resistance from stakeholders to change, lack of digital or technology adaptability, and limited availability of sustainable alternatives. So please log into menti.com 56435164 and give us your response. And in the meantime, my panel, your turn. If we could go across and just introduce yourselves, and maybe we could answer the first question, which, what are the challenges that you see that Malaysian organizations are facing? Mr. Koo, I'll start with you at the far end, and maybe we could come back this way.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hope I'm coming across loud and clear. Sustainability has been a very broad topic of concern, especially since the COVID lockdown, and everybody's now back into the normal mode. There was a question raised whether during the COVID period we'll see a fundamental shift in the thinking, in the mindset among companies generally. Unfortunately, I don't see that. What's happening is that everybody is back to normal, back to business as usual, BAU, and we are maybe even imagining a larger footprint than even before. This is of great concern to me because I work in the sustainability field quite a lot. In the last 10, 15 years, I've been involved with sustainable biofuels, being the vice chair of the Roundtable for Sustainable Biofuels based in Geneva. And we were looking at various metrics, voluntary sustainability standards, how businesses from feedstock producers down the value chain to even blenders, consumers, be able to maintain a sustainable operation, so to speak. And getting around to an agreement on what is sustainable and what's not is a challenge by itself already. And mindset comes into play quite a lot. A lot of you here, I understand, are in the logistics business. I personally am in the upstream business for agriculture. So we see a lot of movement of goods and services, and there's always the footprint issue. Traceability, just now somebody mentioned, in terms of how well the crops or the production of the material is observed in terms of their sustainability criteria. So there's a lot of mindset issue of receiving the challenges and how to adapt to them. I'm going to leave it at that for the moment, and I'm going to stop there so that everybody can digest what I've said and even come back to me with even more questions.
All right. So, for what I'm hearing there, is that one is the mindset is a challenge. Understanding what is sustainable and what isn't, and tracing that. So 3 good points. Dr. Jenny.
So for me, I think one of the key issues which has been mentioned earlier on will be the labor shortages. So in Malaysia itself, I would like to share some statistics. Manufacturers, from the manufacturers industry as well as the construction, we are in shortage of about 600,000 of workers. And palm oil industry itself, more than 100,000. So let alone when we talk about transportation, one of our companies, sister company, Safeguard Oceanic, we are actually under Safeguards Group of Corporation. We are also having labor shortages as well, truckers and all this. And interestingly, I had a conversation over lunch earlier on this disparity. So I was going in from the academia point of view. So just now we had a conversation about how we have this shortage of labor, and then we talk about foreign labor and all this. And from my point of view, I have been in academia for more than 20 years. So the graduates, they have a different mindset. So they are of a different generation as the Generation Z. So to them, it's like, I would like to work as and when I like, flexible working hours, but this may not be the case for our logistic industry as well as supply chain industry. And on top of that, the salary disparity makes a huge difference here. So there's always this gap between graduates' expectation and the employers, wanting the labors and all this. And we've been talking about this for many, many years. And to be honest, I'm still searching for answer. So if any one of you have any suggestion, please, by all means, because some of my students, they came to me and they say, Dr. Jenny, it's very difficult. If you say it's about 2,000, if you are living in KL, in PJ, after you minus all these accommodation, food, transport, how much do I get? And I have to pay for my family, all right? So these are the things that the graduates are talking about.
Okay, so that's more from a social side.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Yep. Kieran?
Good afternoon. My name is Jeroen Hendricks. I'm a consultant in Art of Supply Chain, and I work for local and MNCs. And what I see, and it's very interesting talking to people here because it confirms I only get a very small section of I only have a few customers, of course. But what I've noticed there is the same thing which I get here when I talk to people, is that the push for sustainability really comes outside of Malaysia. So if you work in an MNC, MNCs are much more focused on sustainability. They know more, they add more resources. And that push actually comes from outside of Malaysia. So it's not the MNC here in Malaysia which take the initiative, but it's the one outside. Of course, bigger push is Europe, America, Australia, but I think China will come up more and more as well. Local companies, I don't see it that much, and I'm very encouraged actually of the amount of time that was spent on sustainability during this first day.
Yeah, I think that's
I
encouraging.
was actually thinking we don't need this panel anymore because most of it was discussed already during the other panels. So it's really alive. Sustainability is alive. Environment is alive. I also see that yes, MNCs are more sustainable focused, sustainability focused, but if it comes from the head office overseas and it is just a policy, you miss that. And what Mr. Koo said, the mindset, and that's something which I overall in Malaysia see is that the mindset is not environment focused, and that builds up to companies how they react.
Okay, and according to Jan, we're finished for the day. Thank you very much. No, just joking. Roger, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm the founder of a local logistics company. So I come from the SME background. So this is my words to all of us over here. I think for the logistics industry, coming from low margins, and then the question will be, hey, why should I invest in sustainability? Customary demanding for cheap pricing. We're going to invest in all these electric vehicles, blah blah blah. Who's going to pay for the cost? So it's not a question of who's going to pay for the cost. It's a question that if you don't do it, then you are not in the contracts for bigger businesses. So the SME mindsets that you have to change, and you have to look at sustainability not for the sake of doing greenwashing, about efficiency. That's what you should look at sustainability as.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Just to come back through to the poll, right? If we just all have a bit of a shimmy around and have a look. So the first response is limited awareness and understanding of sustainability practices. And I think most people in the room, and we've heard this echoed in a couple of the conversations today, number 20, we've had 28 that responded and said that was the biggest problem. And then the next thing is the high implementation costs. So they're the main challenges that we are seeing. And I think that agrees a lot with what we've seen in the panel discussion today. Now, if we move this on to the next question, which is talking about the measures that can be taken to reduce carbon emissions and promote greener methods. Now, this is, I think, one of the things that people really asked for today was about specifics about what can we do. But before we get to that, again, I'm going to ask you something. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. Everybody, please stand up. We're going to do something called a body poll. So please stand up. Everybody stand up. And I think my panel, you can also participate in this. This would be good as well. All right, everybody up. Stand up. Now, we're going to do a body poll. Now, I'm going to ask you, don't do this yet, because otherwise you'll have your arms up for quite some time. So I'm going to ask you to put your arms like this. And then when I say go, I want you to tell me how much does carbon emissions and sustainability matter to your company? How much does carbon emissions and sustainability matter to your company? If it's 0, it's like this. If it's like 25%, it's like this. If it's like 50%, if you live and breathe sustainability at your organization, you should be like this, 100%, right? No, we'll just go with this, right? We don't want people breaking their backs like this, all right? Unless you're really enthusiastic about it, all right? Okay, so ready? 1, 2, 3, go. All right, look around the room, see where everybody is. Have a look. Okay, so we do have some companies where it is living and breathing, and we've got quite a few that are interested on this, but we've got some that it's a little bit more like this, okay? Arms down, thank you very much. So just give me a good feel about how it's going. Round of applause to you all, thank you. Okay, did you expect to see those results? Was that along the lines? There was still quite a few that were living and breathing, yeah? It's progressive, all right? So it's progressing on a bit more than we thought. Now, in terms of some of the actions, just to come back to the idea about, having hardcore things that we can do, I think there were a lot of companies that were like this. Do you all notice that? Yeah, so it's all a bit like this. And I think that's because we're all at the goal setting stage and we're not yet operationalizing sustainability, right? And I think that's a key thing that we're finding at IDC. We've got a statistic where we asked a whole lot of transport and logistics companies, and 22% in Asia Pac said that they were at the point where they're ready to operationalize it. That means go beyond just goal setting, right? Actually do stuff about it. And I think that is, and then our survey said that the 32% are actually planning to do that within the next 3 years. 22 within the next 12 months, 32 within the next 3 years. So we're starting to see some momentum starting to build. All right, so coming back to this idea of operationalizing and doing something about this, I'll turn to my panel here and just say, repeating the question I asked earlier, which is, what measures can be taken or should organisations take in order to reduce emissions in their supply chains or turn to work with their ecosystem to do that? Because I think that's what we've heard today is people want to know about that. I'll open it up to everybody, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start first. So I think before you start any sustainability program, now the buzzword called ESG, environmental social governance, the first thing is that the management needs to buy in. The management needs support. If the management doesn't support, forget about doing anything ESG. Secondly, do a job redesign for all your employees so they understand the importance of doing an ESG initiative. This is the two key. Next, go to technology. Start small, okay? So things like start small for small SME companies. First thing you can do, look at the LED lights. Okay, this is the first efforts. Then look at to going paperless. Okay, freight forwarders, we are the culprit of heavy paperwork. Look into digitalizing your processes so you minimize your paperwork. So these are all small baby steps that you can take before you embark on bigger projects. That's how I started. Okay, today of course, recently, in fact, just last week we won a sustainability award from a US $16 billion company. So we provide sustainability policy and implementation, and we won the winners. So these are baby steps you take, and it takes time to build up these capabilities to be answering to environmental social governance. Thank you.
And I'm going to pivot to Jörn on this because I think this relates to a conversation that you and I were having earlier where you've got to acknowledge that all this counts as sustainability, right? Yeah.
Yeah, correct. I think I've during the day, there's a lot of discussion about sustainability and people saying, I actually reduced my carbon footprint, but I don't know what to do. That's what I heard. Well, what people were saying was, well, for example, the e-commerce, I'm moving goods to the passenger planes, and with that, I'm actually reducing my carbon footprint. The straws from McDonald's, right? Yes, I totally agree. There's a huge financial benefit to McDonald's as well, and I'm probably very sure that that was a main factor. But it doesn't. It still means that it's good for the environment. So I think I think within logistics and supply chain, I think we all know already what to do. Fuel is a major contributor. Packaging, depending on where you are in the supply chain, packaging is a big one. Inventory, just buying, reduce, right? That's a big one. I think the first thing is just to realize that if you're already moving air to sea, that you are helping the environment, and take that into the discussion, right? So I think a lot of people are doing already. I think that was an interesting thing that you did. I think if people start looking at like that, I think a lot of more people will go from quarter to actually in half. And I think actually we are doing things for the environment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that you will actually get more support for things that are doing double duty. And what I mean by double duty is that they're contributing to financial outcomes as well as ESG outcomes. That's where you get the greatest support. And some people are like, oh yeah, but the company should believe in it. You know what? As long as we get to that point, does it matter the reason why we did it, right? And I'm being a touch cynical here because I think that a lot of the times we're going to have to put the financial metric out there in order to get the support to make it happen. So we were talking earlier about having energy efficient technologies, right? Things that allow you to monitor your production lines, your rolling assets, to make sure that the route optimization, to make sure that they're able to deliver more efficiently, they spend shorter times on the road, they use less fuel. All of this saves money, increases efficiency. But it's also a sustainable outcome, right? You're using less fuel is one, right? So I think we need to recognize that and start to put that into our ROI calculations. Now, you mentioned fuel. I'd like to pop across to Ku and say, you represented with regards to biofuels and all that. Is there anything that organizations can do with regards to that? Throw support behind some things or invest in some things?
It's very interesting because in terms of biofuels is only one aspect of the replacement of fuels in general for fossil fuels. I mean, you can have renewable energy in all its various contexts, like electric vehicles. They come from power sources anyway, and then basically you have to trace back to where what type of renewable fuels you're talking about. But I'd like to go back to the larger issue of finance versus GHG emissions, the environmental impact. And I've been asked a lot of times, what will move the needle where sustainability is concerned? And I always get back a lot of answers that fall into the category of incrementalism. There are a lot of incremental measures that are taken to satisfy internal requirements, external reporting, shareholder, stakeholder requirements up to a point. But do they have any significant impact on GHG emissions, climate change, the, uh, the temperature which we have reached the point of no return, and all that kind of stuff? What will it take to really make a significant impact? I would like to, spend just 2 minutes on this topic, if I can, because it's so fundamental and it addresses the issue of mindset as well. It actually goes back to the basis of the capitalist economy that we have today around the world. I have actually done a lot of research in this, and in Dr. Marco, I'm sure if you go back to the Netherlands, there's one institute for true cost, and this is what I've been fascinated by. They go around calculating what is the true cost of any product, including labor, including all the various inputs that go in. So we go back to what is called the system boundary of any business. And the system boundary that is taken into account in the financial sense, accounting, does not take into account externalities, or has not taken into account externalities. We are beginning to see more and more. In fact, Climate Governance CGM Malaysia has introduced a new topic. How do you price externality like carbon? And we're talking about carbon pricing and carbon taxing. So we are beginning to see topics like this come up. But as long as externalities are not taken into account, we're going to see only incrementalism in terms of approaches. And when you have a look at externalities, you're basically trying to check in terms of your company's outlook, your corporate outlook, whether you're corporate oriented or whether you're eco-oriented, eco-centric. And that's where I feel the mindset change will come depending on the outlook of the leadership. So sustainable leadership is very important in this sense that it applies to all companies, logistics companies included, all across the value chain.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because I think from an externality perspective, there are two factors that are, I guess, calling that value into the balance sheet. And I would say the first one, and I'll talk to you, Roger, about this shortly, which is the request from customers. Because if customers, and we're seeing changes due to the German Supply Chain Act, the European due diligence reporting requirements, these are looking not just into the companies, but they're being asked to report on their supply chains. And so, Roger, you and I were having a conversation about that earlier. Before we go into that in more detail, though, I'd also like to talk about financial institutions, and I actually think this is a really powerful lever. Financial institutions, I was having a conversation with a food and beverage organization. They have production capabilities they're headquartered out of Singapore, but they have production capabilities in Thailand and in Australia. And they were told that if they don't start operationalizing sustainability, and they don't have a chief sustainability officer on the board, and if they don't start committing to these goals and showing that they're moving to it, their loans are going to be increased by 10 basis points, and they are going to lose access to capital. Now, this is starting to get the attention of the CFO, which is to your point, bringing those externalities into a financial accountability aspect, I think. But just to circle back with the customer aspect, Roger, you were sharing with me earlier about, customers are asking for it. What are they asking for, and how is this affecting your business?
Yeah, sure. So for all of us, look at your customers. If your customer make a pledge, I want to be net zero by 2025, by 2030, you better take that seriously. I tell you why. Because in a large MNC company, internally they can only cover scope 3, probably 15%. 85% of their carbon emission comes from outsourced parties. So sooner or later in the procurement, they will demand that the vendors, you come up with a sustainable policy, or you demonstrate to us that you have a sustainability plan that will meet their overall goals of net zero by 2025 or 2030. So if you don't start these things and you start leave it as it is, you'll be out of business because you're not going to be invited for the RFP or even the RFQ. So you got to start small.
Yeah. So another way that this externality is starting to come into financial implications. So it's a good point that you raise. Just to circle a little bit back on the social side of things, because I think sustainability is linked on this. And Dr. Jenny, I haven't asked you this question before, but I will throw it out there. I think one of the things, and this came up with a conversation that you and I was having with another participant here, the value of sustainability as an employee, right? I think one of the things that we are often saying in logistics, you know, and we did mention this before about the labour side of things, you know, paying not enough is one thing, but also we're losing access to employees because our industry isn't sexy, right? And I always talk about bringing sexy back into the supply chain. But one of the ways that we can actually do that or enable that, A, is through digitalization. And the second is through sustainability. People need to have something to believe in. Is this something that you're seeing in younger generations? And what impact do you think this will have on an organization's ability to attract employees into their fold?
I think one of the very interesting thing is that I would like to share is that most of the parents, some of the parents of the students or potential parents, potential students, they do not know what is logistic or even supply chain. So when we counsel the students or the parents, they say, oh, I don't want my son or daughter to be a truck driver. Although I know truck driver, no offense to any of the truck drivers, I think it's a very noble occupation, but that is the mindset being planted on the, you know, the parents' mindset is that, oh, I don't want my kids to be truck driver, lorry driver. But we need to educate them to say that, look, logistics and supply chain is more than that. And I was having a conversation with Euron earlier on and says that it is actually involving everything in the world, all right? The world will not spin, all right, will stop if we don't have logistics or supply chain in one day. So that kind of mindset we have to actually instill in the society in terms of the campaign that we have and all this. And in terms of the employees, how are we going to make this logistics or supply chain to be more sexy in that sense is that I think we need to have a lot of engagement, a lot of awareness campaign and all this. And I think one of the things like what Dr. Raymond mentioned earlier is that we all go back to basic. Going back to basic, for example, engaging with the students. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Raymond as well as the Logism, because with this, I have 15 of my students here. Can you all just raise your hand attending this conference?
There's extra marks in it. Come on, raise your hands.
Can you all give them a round of applause? I think this is a great exposure to them. And I hope that, you know, in future, we can make this happen more often. Yeah.
All right, we have a young student here. I'm going to throw the question to you. Does sustainability matter to you for future employees, in future employers? Do you want them to have sustainable policies?
For me, yes, of course, because when we're talking about sustainability, it's only about our, working anything. It's also about our country or about our earth, environment. So it's really important that, because if we actually implement that method or way to say sustainability, so that maybe our future or our next generation or maybe our child or anything, maybe it's too far. So it will be better in the future. So it's really important for us. Sorry, would you like to repeat again? If you had two jobs to choose from, one company had sustainability goals and one company did not. Which is more attractive? Of course, will be the option A, that one that provide more sustainability method. Yeah.
Thank you.
Stephanie, just to add on.
Please.
Yeah, while my students were saying that, of course, he will choose the one with a more sustainable initiative. But bear in mind that some of the SMEs, they do not have the means to actually implement some of the initiative, like what we are talking about, when MNCs, they do have the funding and all this. But what about those smaller organizations? Will they be deprived of these initiatives, and how can we actually assist in any way to ensure that they will be on board as well? So these are some of the things that we need to consider.
What do you think, Roger, Mr. Winner of Gold Sustainable Partner?
So I started with a 5-man team in Singapore. Today, my team is across Asia Pacific, 150 manpower. When I started the company, the first thing I did was digitalization and to do anything to do paperless, so that I have a sustainable plan. So I think it's not about getting grants for the government. You have to do it with or even without any grants. It's either you do it or you're out. So you like I say, take baby steps. Okay, you don't have to do it like the MNC. Start with the management down to your employees. Go to basic things like LED lights, your software, and then later you have to make more money. Go to electric vehicles, and there are many can do. There's a lot of technology out there that they can help you to be more sustainable.
Great. And Marcus, do you want to put the Menti up there? The next one. Yeah. So if we've got any questions from the audience, please put them in, or if anybody wants to raise their hand, happy to take a live question on the floor. But when it comes to the government aspect, Roger, you've raised that, and I think that's very important. Is it important in Malaysia for government to be pushing this, or is it something that organisations should be taking on? Yuan, Dr. Jenny, or Ku, would you like to handle that one?
Thank you very much. I think the government, of course, is a major driver in sustainability initiatives, and a lot has been done. In fact, the relevant ministries or the relevant agencies have already initiated several programs for this. In terms of our presentations and our goals that we have set, we are very lofty ones. The big issue now is execution and how do you achieve this down the line. One of my projects, for example, that I've been working on recently is sustainable aviation fuel, and it's a big driver. We're yet to see how the players in the game are actually going to incentivize this across the board. Aviation fuel, as you know, has no choice but to look at the liquid form. There's no electric planes yet, no solar powered planes as yet, so there's no choice. Whereas on the ground, you have a lot more. So innovation comes into play. Development of supply chains. There's only just one sector. There's a lot more, but some sectors are hotter than the others, I'm going to say. Biogas deployment, voluntary carbon exchange that's been developed by First as an initiative. So all this has to come together, orchestrated in a more comprehensive manner to move the needle, so to speak. We have set our objectives, 2030, 2050, so much and so much more decarbonization. Our deforestation rate has got to come down. In fact, we have to reforest back to achieve pre-1990 levels if we are able to achieve that. So there's a lot going on. And I just want to add one more thing to my reference by my other panelists, which is the external pressure. Europe, as you know, is really a powerhouse where sustainability is concerned. And I'm going to say that primarily so because in the last 5 years, they have been on one straight line in terms of not taking care of the externality so much. And so we're seeing the big impact from there. Not a lot of wealth has accumulated. And of course, that wealth translates into technology, and they can therefore afford policies that favor sustainability, whereas the lesser developed countries, Malaysia included, cannot. So issues like the cost of technology and all that come into play. How do we have more efficient vehicles, planes, engines, alternative modes of transport, perhaps? So these choices have to be faced, and I think at every COP meeting, there's always this issue of who pays for the technology. And so that's why governments in their overall treatment of this matter have got to treat it carefully. and negotiations go on. With every COP, the GHG emissions go up, it doesn't come down.
I've got to be honest, I think that's a cop out. We had in the supply chain forum, and if we could get a microphone to the gentleman in the middle here, we had in Logisim Asia Pac, we had Skunkworks, startup Skunkworks for supply chain, and all three of them were sustainability driven. And we put an open call out for startups and things like that. Startups in supply chain, and rather than being the traditional delivery focused e-commerce last mile, all of them were supply chain sustainability driven. So I think we're seeing a lot of innovation come out. I think a lot of, and even China is one of the largest markets for EV, and one of the largest producers in that particular area. I think this is going to be actually a competitive advantage for us, not necessarily a source of, oh, we can't afford it. I really think that's something that we can go on with. Yes, we had a question here.
Yeah, there's one question. Regarding with the logistics and supply chains, right? I think what's the measurement in the contribution of ESG to achieve the ESG sustainability? I think most of the freight are using petrol and diesel. This causes a lot of carbon. So what's the measurement and what's the goal to achieve? I would not say to 100%, to gradually achieve it, to reduce and to achieve for ESG.
So I think the question is about, where is the main carbon emission? You think it's around fuels? Yes, is that right?
The measurement to
the
measurement of KPI, any KPI set in the logistics SCM to achieve for this.
Cool. I'll throw it back to you from a fuel perspective. Are you hearing any metrics being sent by fuel organizations to say that they need to reduce or get to 100% biofuel use by a certain time? What sort of targets are you seeing set? Dr. Jenny, if you could just share the microphone, please. Thanks.
Yeah. If you don't mind, thanks. Certainly for aviation, there is a target set. I think IATA or the aviation industry has set 50 a certain percentage for the year 2030. At least 10% of SAF has to be on planes. That's for air passengers. There is, I think, a certain target set for marine fuels as well. We're getting around to what is the definition of sustainable fuel. So we have achieved that for aviation fuel. We're working on that now for marine fuel, and getting to see what kind of supply sources, what kind of treatments they can have to qualify as sustainable marine fuel. So that's two. On land transport, biodiesel, ethanol has always been there as replacements. The issue is uptake and pricing and government mandate and of course subsidy as well. But I think the original question is what metric is there for measuring emissions, and footprints for the logistic industry. So I believe fuel is the major operational cost, and that's where a lot of companies try to achieve targets, if possible, set through renewable fuel, electric vehicles for ground transport perhaps. And you got to look at the source of electricity too, fuel efficient vehicles if possible, and alternatives to high emission transportation, like shipping was mentioned just now. I think that's one of the key areas. In fact, at the aviation conference in May, we were mildly amused that someone suggested let's fly less and let's take the ship more. So I wonder, and of course, rail transport has been one of the key areas. If I answer your question, I'm not sure.
Great, thank you. Now, I'll just finish with one other tech. Like we've talked a lot about digitalization. So, Yen, maybe if I could turn to you and say, in terms of digitalization, what are you seeing out there in terms of analytics, optimization, AI? What have you seen anything, or what are the people you're talking about? I mean, even from a very base level all the way to most advanced.
The discussions on in systems are purely standard, operational cost down. Environment doesn't really come up as a driver. So I asked you also earlier whether there are actually modules or software providers who actually add a module, an environmental module. So you said yes. I wasn't aware, so I'm happy that happened, because it's if you have analytics, but it doesn't convert to, I think, what the gentleman was going for as well. Okay, well, I've changed my truck, or I'm more efficient. So how much is that actually bringing me? There needs to be a calculation there. And if software companies can actually add that as a module, I think that will enhance the discussion. But overall, I think what I do see is that it all sounds nice, data analysis and the software systems, and they're there. But a lot of times, the problem is not, I think cost these days is not so much more a problem. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, these systems were very expensive. Cost has gone down dramatically. But it is the maintenance of the system. It's, you need people to analyze, and then you get to the labor and the students, right? You guys don't have, we had one slide saying, hey, there's a lot of jobs going to be obsolete because of AI, but you're going to get a lot of other very exciting jobs back. People have to still analyze all the data that comes out. I think that's still lacking, and that's still a threshold that companies find difficult to take, because Malaysia is still overall a low cost labor country. So to transform that to a digital economy, I think that's something that Malaysia still needs to go through. That's, I think, the first step.
Okay, thank you. I think what we are seeing, though, and I think you've mentioned it briefly, is there are opportunities to use digital as the way to go sustainable, right? And I think with things like cloud, you are looking less into the maintenance side, because you are looking to technologies that are maintained, the infrastructure is maintained by somebody else, and you are able to actually keep your modules up to date. So there are certainly options out there. From a carbon calculation perspective, we are seeing organizations, Terrascope is one that comes to mind just off the top of my head, that do actually do carbon accounting and do things like models that will actually calculate how much a particular activity is emitting. They do this either through models, and then they're working on how they're going to do that from an actual perspective, so using sensors and the likes to actually look at, in this particular truck, what sort of emissions are happening and how can we improve the efficiency of that. So there are ways forward, and they're not necessarily as costly as we might think. There has been a few questions, and I've asked March just to scroll through a few. There's one burning issue that's in the room, and it's like, can you go back to the previous one, Marches? There seems to be this idea that, how do you see government playing a part in supporting sustainability, and do you agree if the government should make sustainability compulsory to everybody? Any thoughts of that in Malaysia and how that would play out?
Well, what I see is, I don't see much.
I mean, why don't they just do it?
Well,
Pass a law tomorrow.
I think it'll take some time, but I think the main thing of the government, you mentioned that companies need to invest themselves. I think it also depends on what market you're in. If you want to compete with, or you want to offer services to European companies, you have to. So private companies have it. But I think there's a lot of companies of those pure local companies, or if you do a lot of business with non-sustainable country-focused countries, then I think the trigger and the push for you to go into sustainable is much lower. So I think the government there plays an important part to offer, to give that push, give subsidies, and I think also as Malaysia as a country, we all know that ESG environment is the future. So that means, and we all know that if there's a risk and things change, there are a lot of opportunities. And I think that's where the government of Malaysia is missing out. Malaysia needs to set up their own environmental industry, which then can be exported to, can learn, set up, start, learn from companies like yourself, set up, build that experience, then export it or set up their own industry, or etc. So I think, and that's companies, private companies will companies, a few companies will do that, not enough. So that's where the government comes in to set up a whole industry, which you see, for example, in Europe and in America.
Yep. Okay.
Can I add on to that?
Sure.
So I kind of agree with you, Ron, as well. So the other thing I would like to highlight is probably the stakeholder engagement. Apart from the government initiatives, I think we should have more engagement between the industries, governments, NGOs, as well as the academic institutions. These are very important. And on the other hand, just to highlight is that the Green Index for 2022 for Malaysia, we are actually second last for Southeast Asia. So I think there's a lot more to do in terms of initiatives, and it's not only taking from the government point of view, but everybody should put their hands together.
Stephanie, this question is very interesting. In fact, it relates back to what is sustainability. And when you talk about sustainability, there's so many dimensions. There's carbon, there's biodiversity, there's even the issue of things like plastic. I don't know how you call it. They are actually intrusions into our space, our environmental space. So who is responsible for all these issues to be resolved? We can always go back to government and say government policy can always solve these things. But if we always go back to government and delegate to them and leave them to solve the issues, then as citizens, do you want to think of being imposed upon a carbon tax, which is going to happen, a biodiversity tax? Each time you cut down a tree or deforestation, you have to pay this tax so that the trees are preserved. Are you comfortable with a plastic tax so that you can collect this tax? In a way, you're already paying a tax for the energy. The electricity bill that you receive every month has a certain cess or provision for renewable energy. So this is the tax you pay. And in relation to this, therefore, if you take a look at the larger picture, are you willing to pay a sustainability tax? And how are you going to quantify this tax? The policymakers in Project will have to calculate this for the next budget, if not the next budget, maybe sometime in 2025 or 2030. And eventually you'll have a huge funding for an agency that goes to look at this sort of things to fund the policies that have to be in place, including innovation.
And enforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah, so certainly a topic that we could go on for hours and hours about, and we kind of have all day, on and off. Thank you very much for my panelists for engaging in such a lively conversation, and thank you for your participation on the floor. Big round of applause to you all. Thank you. And to my panelists.